Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, the global recession and what can be done about it. We chat with Dr. Robert Scott of the Economic Policy Institute. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was the first bill President Obama signed into law. We speak with Sharyn Tejani of the National Partnership for Women and Families about whether this will end discriminatory pay practices. Clean coal, America's energy and environmental solution, or an industry hoax. Kate Rooth, research director of Greenpeace USA, aims to set the record straight. Also, photographer Sam Kittner takes us inside the inauguration of President Barack Obama.
As for our common defense, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals.
We've got poetry by Kwame Alexander and music by Amy on the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. The debate over the stimulus and bailout plans are pretty hard to sort out for folks like me who have a hard enough time managing our family budgets, let alone the outlay of hundreds of billions of dollars. Given the U.S. economy has already lost 3.6 million jobs and the recession is even worse overseas, and all the indicators are still pointing south, most everyone agrees that the government should act, but how? With us to sort this out is Dr. Robert Scott, senior international economist at the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Rob, to the Coffee House.
Thanks for having me.
I mentioned that the president says something like 3.6 million jobs have been lost since the beginning of the recession. January was the worst month of all in terms of job loss yet.
Right.
Things are getting worse. But in the United States, it isn't really as bad as it is elsewhere, is it?
No, we have some tools at our disposal that some other countries don't have. Consider that a country, in say Africa, they don't have the ability to run their own independent monetary policy. We've got a Federal Reserve that's printing literally trillions of dollars to put them into circulation to get the banks going again. Their governments don't have the ability to engage in multi-billion-dollar stimulus plans. They're basically dead in the water. They're really getting hit very, very hard.
And it isn't just the extremely impoverished countries like in Africa, but it's also the old tigers in Asia. It's Europe as well. Tell me about what's going on in those places.
Well, for example, last week we had a peso crisis in Mexico, and the peso lost half of its value. South Korea has gone through something similar. The countries in Europe are certainly in as much trouble as we are. Last week, the IMF put out a new forecast for the global economy. They projected that in market terms, there would actually be a reduction in GDP worldwide in 2009.
GDP being the gross domestic
product
in all of these different countries in aggregate?
In aggregate, global output was going to shrink for the first time in decades, and usually it grows at least 4 or 5% a year. So that's what we refer to as economists as an output gap. That's output that's lost that will never be recovered. It's gone. And it amounts to hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. In the U.S., they're predicting a decline of about 1.9% in output. I think the United Kingdom is looking at the worst forecast, a decline of about 2.8%. And through much of Europe, they're looking at declines of anywhere from 1.5% to 2.5%. In output. So it's certainly worse in Europe than it is here.
And these are economies that are accustomed to having higher rates of unemployment than the U.S. to begin with, are they not?
That's right, and they also have, fortunately for them, they have much better social safety nets. So you can lose a job in Europe and you're less threatened with ending up in the street, which is, of course, the great danger here.
But I'm wondering if, given the current crisis globally, are we beginning to see impacts in terms of social and political stability anywhere in the world? Is there beginning to be a groundswell of
insurgency anywhere against government policies or ineffectual governments?
Well, we're certainly seeing that in places like China. The Chinese have been worried for some time that workers are going to revolt. They're faced with revolts in many places. Workers often find that they go unpaid for months at a time, and there have been reports when they would meet with local officials, and local officials would accuse them of being lazy workers for not getting, and that they say the firms must have had reasons for not paying them, when in fact firms just did not have the money.
We're looking at about an $800 billion stimulus package in the U.S. As we tape this, the Senate is yet to actually vote to adopt a measure, and then it has to be reconciled with the House's measure, but we'll probably come at about $800 billion stimulus package.
Something like that, yes.
Now, in the context of a global economy, when you have so many other economies that are now critical to how the entire global system functions, Russia's, China's, India's, Japan's, Europe's, to what extent can even that magnitude of a stimulus package in the U.S. really change the course of the global economy?
Well, I think it matters in two ways. First of all, the U.S. is still about 25% of total global output. That our economy is responsible for about a quarter of the entire output of the global economy. So as the U.S. economy goes, so goes the rest of the world. If we can begin to recover, that can help other countries recover. It also creates the policy space for other countries to engage in big stimulus packages. In fact, we're not the first. The Chinese were the first. They came up with their own $600 billion stimulus plan 3 or 4 months ago. We're behind the curve because we were stuck with a transition period of about 2.5 months where essentially nothing happened in terms of macroeconomic stimulus.
There is a difference in the approaches to the stimulus package, both between the Senate and the House, in Democrats and Republicans.
Of course.
There is a tendency for the Democrats to focus on what they call investment, or what the Republicans call spending, and on the Republican side to focus on tax cuts.
Right.
Tell me about both the philosophical difference underlying these two approaches and what the difference is in their actual stimulative effects.
Okay. First of all, in terms of the philosophy, Democrats believe that right now what we need is a big injection of spending in the economy. It's projected that over the next year and a half through 2010, we will have output that's about 7 to 9% less than our potential. That's what we call, again, an output gap. And if we're going to close that gap, we need to find that spending somewhere. 7 to 9% of GDP is right around $2 trillion. And best estimates are that it would take government spending on the order of somewhere between $750 billion and $1 trillion to get the economy restarted and to fill that gap. And Democrats believe that government spending which actually directly creates jobs or which keeps people employed is most effective. And I'll talk about why when I come back to this so-called multiplier effect in a moment. The Republicans, on the other hand, believe that government spending is wasteful. They're concerned about the effect of deficit spending on future generations. And they simply prefer tax cuts. And they've been trying for 30 years to use tax cuts to put the money back in the hands of consumers. I think the real agenda there is that what they really want to do is shrink government, what they call starve the beast. And so progressively over the last 30 years, we've seen government revenues as a share of output fall steadily. Under the Bush administration, they fell from about 20% of GDP to about 16 or 17%. Actually, spending under the Bush administration was relatively constant, about 20% of GDP. So we got this gap of about 4%. That's the deficit that the Bush administration bequeathed to President Obama. And now, of course, that gap is going to get much bigger for a while before it shrinks. I think the irony is that while the Republicans talk a lot about their concern about deficits, in fact, this is what they've done. They've maintained spending and cut taxes and government revenues, and so they have generated very big deficits to leave their children and everyone's.
The amount of the stimulus package, it really does boggle the mind for most of us. And concerns about whether you think it should be through tax cuts or through spending, huge concerns about accountability and transparency and whether this money is going to be used as it's intended to be used. And I'm wondering, how do we ensure that that's the case, one? And secondly, when should we expect to begin to see the results of this package?
Well, I think one of the things we have to do as part of the package is to rebuild government. One of the things that's been done over the last 10 or 15 years is that the number of government workers has declined steadily. We've come to rely much more on outside contractors to do audits of government performance, and that just hasn't worked very well. We need to rely again on government to audit government performance. But secondly, I think we don't need to be too concerned about the risk of spending too much, about there being some waste. There inevitably is going to be some waste, some projects that are going to be more effective than others. The important thing is that we're going to get spending going in the economy, and we're going to hire people and put them to work. As Keynes said, during the Great Depression, we would be better off if we hired people to dig ditches and then pay them to fill the same holes up again and then dig them all over again, than to leave people sitting by the side of the road idle. So the point is to give people jobs and give them wages. But more importantly, we can also, we know more now, we can also get them to do things like insulate our schools and wire them for the internet and to fix the leaks in the roofs and these kinds of things that can actually give us a head start on the kinds of investments that President Obama would like to make. And
when should we begin to see the impact?
It's going to take probably 1 to 2 years. The best estimates are that something like 3/4 of the spending will take place in 2009 and 2010. So let's assume that a bill goes to President Obama, say by the middle of February, and he signs it. It's going to take probably a couple of months to get the spending in the pipeline. Some tax cuts will go out, and those will certainly begin to show up in consumers' pocketbooks by June or July, and so we'll see spending beginning to go up by then.
Great. Many thanks to Rob Scott for helping us better understand the scope and gravity of the current economic crisis, our financial well-being, the stability of our political and social institutions, and the future prospects for our children hang in the balance. We can't afford to leave this one just to the experts on Wall Street to decide for us. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
Great, Mark. Thank you.
My fellow citizens, I stand here today humbled by the task before us, grateful for the trust you've bestowed, mindful of the sacrifices borne by our ancestors. That we are in the midst of crisis is now well understood. Our nation is at war against a far-reaching network of violence and hatred. Our economy is badly weakened, a consequence of greed and irresponsibility on the part of some, but also our collective failure to make hard choices and prepare the nation for a new age. Homes have been lost, jobs shed, businesses shuttered. Our health care is too costly, our schools fail too many, and each day brings further evidence that the ways we use energy strengthen our adversaries and threaten our planet. Our capacity remains undiminished, but our time of standing pat, of protecting narrow interests and putting off unpleasant decisions, that time has surely passed. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act, not only to create new jobs, but to lay a new foundation for growth. We will build the roads and bridges, the electric grids and digital lines that feed our commerce and bind us together. We will restore science to its rightful place and wield technology's wonders to raise healthcare's quality and lower its cost. We will harness the sun and the winds and the soil to fuel our cars and run our factories, and we will transform our schools and colleges and universities to meet the demands of a new age. The question we ask today is not whether our government is too big or too small, but whether it works. Nor is the question before us whether the market is a force for good or ill. Its power to generate wealth and expand freedom is unmatched. But this crisis has reminded us that without a watchful eye, the market can spin out of control. The nation cannot prosper long when it favors only the prosperous. As for our common defense, we reject as false the choice between our safety and our ideals. Our founding fathers, faced with perils that we can scarcely imagine, drafted a charter to assure the rule of law and the rights of man, a charter expanded by the blood of generations. Those ideals still light the world, and we will not give them up for expedience sake. And so, to all the other peoples and governments who are watching today, from the grandest capitals to the small village where my father was born, know that America is a friend of each nation and every man, woman, and child who seeks a future of peace and dignity, and we are ready to lead once more. Recall that earlier generations faced down fascism and communism not just with missiles and tanks, but with the sturdy alliances and enduring convictions. They understood that our power alone cannot protect us, nor does it entitle us to do as we please. Instead, they knew that our power grows through its prudent use. Our security emanates from the justness of our cause, the force of our example, the tempering qualities of humility and restraint. We are the keepers of this legacy. For we know that our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness. We are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers. We are shaped by every language and culture, drawn from every end of this earth. And because we have tasted the bitter swill of civil war and segregation and emerged from that dark chapter stronger and more united, we cannot help but believe that the old hatreds shall someday pass, that the lines of tribes shall soon dissolve, that as the world grows smaller, our common humanity shall reveal itself, and that America must play its role in ushering in a new era of peace. To the Muslim world, we seek a new way forward based on mutual interest and mutual respect. To the people of poor nations, we pledge to work alongside you to make your farms flourish and let clean waters flow, to nourish starved bodies and feed hungry minds. And to those nations like ours that enjoy relative plenty, we say we can no longer afford indifference to the suffering outside our borders, nor can we consume the world's resources without regard to effect. For the world has changed, and we must change with it. America, in the face of our common dangers, in this winter of our hardship, let us remember these timeless words. With hope and virtue, let us brave once more the icy currents and endure what storms may come. Let it be said by our children's children that when we were tested, we refused to let this journey end, that we did not turn back nor did we falter. And with eyes fixed on the horizon and God's grace upon us, we carried forth that great gift of freedom and delivered it safely to future generations. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
Welcome to Courting Justice at the Coffee House. On January 29th, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009. This law effectively overturned a Supreme Court decision that made it more difficult for women to challenge discriminatory pay practices in the workplace. To what extent do women continue to receive less pay for doing the same work as men? And will this new law make a meaningful difference? Here to tell us about this new law and what it means for women and families is Sharyn Tejani, Senior Policy Counsel at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Welcome, Sharyn, to the Coffee House.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Lilly Ledbetter, she was actually there when President Obama signed the law. Can you tell us a little bit about her? Who is Lilly Ledbetter and what happened to her?
Well, Lilly Ledbetter had been working at the Goodyear plant for about 2 decades. And she was working in a job where she was one of the very few women in that position. And as she was about to retire, she got an anonymous note that told her that she'd been being paid less than the men in the same job as her for years and years and years. And in fact, it turned out that she was being paid about $500 less than the lowest paying man and about $1,500 less per month than the highest paying man. And men with less seniority than her were getting paid more than her.
So over this, you said it was 2 decades, she moved to different types of positions over the course of that time?
No, she was in basically the same type of position, but what had happened was the raises at the plant were based on usually a percentage of your current pay. And since her raises were smaller every time, over the years, this pay differential built up. And some years she didn't get a raise, and some years the men did. And some years she got one, but she got a percentage that was smaller. And every time the smaller percentage happened, her base pay was lower, and therefore her next percentage would be lower.
So bottom line was that she found out that she was being paid less for doing the exact same work as men.
That's exactly right.
And so she decided to file a lawsuit?
She went to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and after she got her right to sue notice, she filed a lawsuit. And she won in the lower court, and she won over $3 million. That was reduced because of how the law works, and you can only give a certain amount of damages. But when the Supreme Court got her case, they decided that she couldn't have anything because she should have filed not when she got the discriminatory paychecks, but rather when the decisions were made to give her less on all of those raises.
Okay, let me just try to understand this. So she didn't even find out about the differentials in pay until she received this anonymous note sometime way at the end of her service there, correct? And so how could she possibly have known each time she was being discriminated against? I mean, isn't that kind of information confidential? I mean, people don't usually know what their coworkers are making on the workplace, do they?
Exactly. People usually don't know what their coworkers are making. So the rule up until this case had been every new paycheck starts the clock all over again.
Starts that 180-day period.
Right. The 180-day period is in the statute, and the statute says you have to file within 180 days of the discrimination happening. And so the question is, does the discrimination happen when they decide to give you a smaller raise, like the Supreme Court said, or when you get the discriminatory paycheck, the way the rule had been prior to this Supreme Court decision? And what the court told Lilly Ledbetter was, no, you should have filed when you got that lower raise, even though you probably didn't know about what the men were getting. And even though that, of course, means that your employer is going to start looking at you more carefully and people are afraid of retaliation. And even though those tiny differences probably don't make that much of a difference to you, it's what happens over time that matters. And so with the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, what Congress and the President have done is returned us to the old system where that 180 days starts every time you get a discriminatory paycheck, and so that people are able to go and get the right kind of justice that they need after they've been paid unfairly.
I see. So this Supreme Court decision was a pretty close one, though, wasn't it? 5-4.
Yes, it was 5-4.
I think Justice Ginsburg wrote the dissent. I believe she read her dissent from the bench. Isn't that pretty unusual for Supreme Court justices to do that?
It is unusual, but they usually do it when they feel very, very strongly about the case. And obviously Justice Ginsburg felt very, very strongly about this case. She's been a champion for women's rights for her entire career, and so to have this happen on her watch, I'm sure upset her a great deal, especially such a close decision.
Exactly. And didn't she almost invite Congress to do something about the Supreme Court case?
Yes, and she cited one of the cases where the Supreme Court, again, had narrowly interpreted the Title VII, the civil rights laws, and Congress had gone in and changed that to make it better for workers. And she said, this is exactly that kind of decision. You really need to do something here.
So it seems like such a blatantly unfair practice or unfair decision. So many people felt that way. Was it difficult getting this law through Congress? I mean, was there much controversy around it?
Well, about a month after the decision was decided, a bill was introduced in Congress to overturn it, and it passed the House, but it couldn't get an up or down vote in the Senate. The Republicans refused to let it go to an up or down vote, and the president at that time, President Bush, threatened to veto it even if it did get through Congress. Now, after the election, it was introduced again, it passed through the House easily, and this time the senators did let it go to an up or down vote, and it passed with a majority. All 4 women Republican senators voted for it, and so did Senator Specter. And then the president signed it because obviously we have a different president now.
Right. But, it still was very much along party lines, with the exception of those women and Senator Specter. What was the argument on the other side as to why the bill shouldn't pass?
Well, the other side argued that this was going to be a boondoggle for trial lawyers, that it was going to be easier to bring unfair pay claims, that people were going to wait and wait 20 years and then suddenly spring this claim on their employer. Now, of course, this was the rule beforehand, so the idea that it would suddenly create all this litigation seems kind of odd. And no one's really going to wait 20 years because people need their paychecks. I mean, especially in this economy, no one is going to wait. And there are all these other defenses that are built into the law about waiting on your rights, and you're not allowed to do that. So people shouldn't wait on their rights. But if you don't know what's happening and it builds up over time in a paycheck, this law will help you.
Right. It's also interesting that if one is against bringing lawsuits, you're right, it seems strange that people would wait. But if you're the type of person that thinks lawsuits shouldn't be brought, wouldn't you kind of want people to wait and not sort of precipitously file lawsuits? So
right.
It seems a little strange that they would make that argument.
The Supreme Court's decision really would encourage you to file as soon as you thought something was wrong, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to vindicate your rights. And the way this works, there's more time to sort of figure out what's going on, to see if there really is a problem, and then you can file.
Yeah. So let's talk about the bigger issue, which is the practice of women being paid less than men. Does it really still happen that frequently?
Well, yes, look at Lilly Ledbetter, right? She was doing the exact same job as the men around her, and she was being paid less. And yes, women get paid about 77 cents to a man's dollar.
And that's illegal, but it continues because people don't find out about it, or?
Well, the 77 cents to the dollar comes out of a lot of components. Some of them are that women work in certain jobs that are always paid less, and that has to do with how we value women's work. It has to do with the fact that women sometimes take time out of work because we expect women to do the caregiving for families. And some of it just has to do with flat-out discrimination, that if you put men and women in the same job, men sometimes get paid more even if they're doing equal work.
Which was the case for Lilly Ledbetter.
Exactly.
So what effect will this law have? I mean, will it really make a meaningful difference in the scheme of things? Are there more laws that need to be passed?
Well, it'll certainly make a difference for those who are being paid discriminatorily, because without this law, it would be very, very hard to challenge discriminatory pay decisions. There are other laws out there that would help as well. One of them is the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would help by making it illegal for employers to retaliate against employees if they start asking about other people's salaries. Because one of the big things about paychecks is that people don't know what other people get paid, and so they don't even know when they're being discriminated against. This law would also make the damages higher for an equal pay violation, and so there'd be a greater incentive for employers to do the right thing. There's also something like the Employee Free Choice Act, which will make it easier for employees to form unions, because studies show that women in unions get paid more than women who are not in unions. They're more likely to have health care benefits, and they're more likely to have pensions.
So employers now can actually fire people for asking employers or even other employees what their salaries are?
It depends on where you work. I mean, if you're a union employee, you probably have more protections than that. But if you're an at-will employee and you work in most states, yes, you probably could get fired if the employer decided that's what they wanted to do, because most of us work just at the pleasure of our employer.
So those acts that you mentioned, the Fair Pay, is it
The
called?
Paycheck Fairness Act and the Employee Free Choice Act.
Are currently pending in Congress
Yes,
now?
they both are.
So if people wanted to get involved to encourage those laws to be passed, what should they do? Should they call their their congressperson, their senator? At what stage are these?
They're
acts
both
on?
neither of them have passed the House or the Senate yet. They have passed the House in the past, but people should educate themselves about these acts, and then go and contact your congressman and your senator and tell them what you think about these.
So, are there other acts, other types of workplace discrimination against women other than sort of the pay discrimination in Lilly Ledbetter's case that still go on? If you could just briefly mention them, we're almost out of time.
Oh, sure. One of the things that we see for women is there's caregiver discrimination, where it's assumed that women don't want the promotion, they don't want the more hours because they're going to have to take care of their family. And so that's something else that we see, that women are held back from opportunities because men or their supervisors decide that there's no way a woman with a child would possibly be interested in this kind of job.
And these are the kinds of issues that you work on at the National Partnership.
That's right.
Well, thank you, Sharyn Tejani, for your important insights on this new law. For more information about workplace discrimination and other issues that affect women and families, visit www.nationalpartnership.org. I'm Angela Davis, and this has been Courting Justice.
I watched your hair transform itself, the way my soul did the first time I felt your voice and wondered if you and I could ever be as tight as the cornrows crowning your spirit. Now my eyes are liquid, a mighty sheen, and they are all over you on top, wishing you would make that switch to shea butter so I could nestle deep within those parts between. Perhaps one day when water is free and heat is complimentary, when hugging is mandatory and love is ongoing, when hotels don't charge for local calls and shoes don't cost so much, when sex is safe and sons have fathers, the way things are supposed to be. Perhaps one day when your couch has been delivered, I will place you betwixt my legs, unravel your thick past, comb through your fine future, repair any damage so we can lock and grow and lock and grow and lock and grow as one. A double helix, coming together, searching for a truth meant to be and finding it. Until then, I will write like it's 1969 and you are Nikki Giovanni and I am H. Rap Brown. We will bring our heads together. Our poems shall be married and birth beautiful black baby haikus that will nurture our vision, determine our direction, confirm our destiny to live these braided fantasies on paper in endless love poems like the one you read that first time and made me wonder if you and I could ever be as tight as the cornrows crowning your spirit. All of this and I don't even know your last name.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. Where does a majority of America's electricity actually come from? Hydropower? Nuclear power? No. Over half our electrical power actually comes from the combustion of coal. And scientists say this increasingly represents the greatest single threat to our climate. Yet utilities nationwide are building dozens of new coal plants even as we speak, in part by claiming that coal can be quote-unquote clean. President Obama even talks about clean coal as a solution. Kate Rooth, research coordinator at Greenpeace USA, takes a contrary view. Let's hear why. Kate, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
So, Kate, Greenpeace and Rainforest Action Network, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, a lot of different groups have chosen March 2nd as a day for a mass civil disobedience at a coal plant next to Congress. So that's a big day coming up. But before we talk about that, what is it? Tell us more about coal that's got everyone so concerned.
Sure. Well, you said it yourself. Coal is the leading contributor to global warming. It accounts for 40% of the carbon dioxide emissions annually here in the U.S. alone. And James Hansen, the leading climate scientist from NASA, has said that it is the most important action that we need to take in order to curb the global warming crisis and to mitigate the worst effects of global warming.
In fact, James Hansen was here in Washington in June, and he said more than oil, more than burning gasoline, if we don't get on top of coal, then we're going to bake the planet. What about this issue about clean coal? We see it on television, the candidates, political candidates talk about it. It's in print ads on subway stations there. Where can we go visit a clean coal plant in America in terms of global warming pollution? Where is it? Where can we go?
Well, you can't. That's the thing. Clean coal refers to a technology known as carbon capture and storage. It's not something that's actually been rolled out in this country. They talk about demonstration projects where they'd like to explore the use of this technology, but to date it has not been deployed, mainly because, as industry will tell you themselves, it's just not commercially viable yet, and it's expensive. All the plants to date have been taken offline because they go so over budget.
So even a demonstration plant, a experimental coal plant doesn't exist in terms of capturing global warming pollution.
Right, not here in this country yet, no. And that doesn't even address all of the life cycle impacts of coal. That only addresses what's coming out of the smokestack. So to call it clean coal is just such a myth. It's just misleading the public. What it's doing is putting a Band-Aid on what is a very large sore that coal creates within this country, both on our climate, our environment, but also human health.
So, I mean, how do we get off coal? I mean, if so much of our electricity comes from the combustion of coal, we can't just snap our fingers and, I mean, what's the substitute?
Sure, so we can't just turn off all the coal plants in the country tomorrow and suddenly still be able to turn our lights on at home, but what we can do is start a phase out. We don't need to have any new plants, and we can start phasing out those that have been grandfathered in for so long and are so old and polluting. And we can start investing in clean renewable solutions like wind and solar that are ready to deploy now. They exist, unlike solutions like carbon capture and storage, which are still 30 years out of the picture.
I know the coal industry constantly says, well, that's nice that you want to do wind and solar and all that, but coal is cheap and demand keeps going up. And I know that a lot of groups say, no, we can do better on efficiency. For example, Californians use half the electricity per capita as people here in the Washington, D.C. area.
Sure.
Okay, take us to March 2nd. It's coming up. It's called the Capitol Climate Action. You're expecting up to 2,000 or more people will risk arrest, peaceful civil disobedience, in the name of global warming. Has that happened before, number one?
No, this will be a truly historic moment, the largest mass mobilization on global warming to date in history here in the United States. It's really exciting.
And what actually is going to happen? Where are you going to gather, and what's going to actually happen? What are people going to do?
Sure. So on March 2nd, people will be coming from all across the country, converging here in D.C. We'll rally in what is known as Spirit of Justice Park, just steps from the Capitol Dome. And
appropriately named.
Yes, exactly. And we'll march down to the Capitol Power Plant, which sits just blocks from Congress, where we will use that image of a coal-burning power plant to symbolize the urgent need for global warming legislation and the bold leadership we need within this new Congress and the administration.
You know, a lot of people don't know there's actually a coal-fired power plant that powers Congress in terms of heating and cooling.
Right, heating and cooling,
just a few blocks
not
from Congress, and you see the smokestacks when you're in downtown D.C. Wendell Berry, the great poet from Kentucky and writer, Bill McKibben, Gus Spath, great writer, former director of the UN Development Project. It goes on and on. These are all people who have said they're going to risk arrest peacefully. Al Gore has endorsed this. In fact, Al Gore said last year that he didn't understand why students all over the country weren't getting arrested outside of power plants. Is Al Gore going to risk arrest?
Well, Al Gore has endorsed the action. We don't know yet if he'll show up on March 2nd, but we hope he will. James Hansen has also endorsed the action. In fact, he said recently that the Capitol Climate Action couldn't come a moment sooner. So it's a really bold endorsement of the event, and we do expect him to be in attendance on March 2nd.
So up to 2,000 or more people blocking the entrance to the coal plant or peacefully blocking a street, a la civil rights movement, Gandhian type stuff. This is all, inspiring, But what about people who say, well, look, we just had an election. We have a new government. We have a new president, Barack Obama. Isn't your timing off? Why not give this new government, especially the new president, time to take action on global warming? Is it not too soon to be taking what some people would see as such a radical step?
Absolutely not. President Obama has said that he wants to make global warming a priority before Memorial Day. Pelosi has said she wants to see legislation passed this year, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard, that we want bold, innovative steps taken on global warming. We're not going to take just a wishy-washy bill like we've seen in previous years. We want real change in this administration and this year. It's been promised to us, and we're going to make sure that we push them to be stronger than they maybe even want to be. Obama has several times talked about clean coal, and we'd like to see that removed from his platform.
Well, why does he talk about clean coal? If it doesn't exist, if it's expensive, and James Hansen and Al Gore and others have said it's a myth and it's harmful, why has he talked about clean coal?
Well, there are a lot of myths out there about clean coal. First of all, I mean, it's not to say that people shouldn't study things that will make something like coal cleaner. It would be great if we could, capture some of the carbon, but what's unknown right now is whether or not that's feasible. And so to continue putting public investments into such an unknown technology when renewables exist, in fact, an investment in solar or wind right now employs 3 to 4 times the number of Americans than the same investment in coal. We need to be making investments in things that promote this economy, that revitalize this economy, and that give sustainable jobs so that we can have a clean and just future for generations to come.
But just that issue of jobs, and I agree with you on every level, but playing devil's advocate some more, there's a recession going on. 600,000 Americans lost their jobs just last month. There are those who would say, the environment is nice, fighting global warming is great, but right now we just need to keep our jobs. Change can be scary all the time, especially in a weak economy. What do you say to people who are really concerned about the economy?
Sure. Well, if we keep down the path that we're going, using dirty energy sources like coal and oil, we're just going to see our prices continue to increase. Electricity, especially if we're starting to add more efficiency standards like CCS to it, rates are going to rise. People are going to see the same effects of their prices hiking up that they would if we make an investment now in renewables, and then in the long run we start to see those rates decline as they become competitive with our traditional sources of energy.
So the message of these up to 2,000 people who have or are expected to register for this event, including you mentioned a number of people who've endorsed it, James Hansen, Al Gore, are going to be making a big ask. They want a cap on carbon dioxide, bring emissions down soon, and all this is this year, in 2009. Is there a bill out there that's really gaining traction in Congress that would address these concerns?
At the moment, legislation has yet to really be focused on in this cycle of the Congress. We'd like to see that happening soon. I know that Markey and Pelosi are both expressing interest in that happening as well. So the challenge is going to be on us as citizens to demand of our representatives that they stick to a really bold cap on climate, an immediate phase out of dirty sources of energy, and an immediate investment in clean alternatives so that we can ensure the energy future that we'd like to see.
And what is it about 2009 that's so important in the climate community? Why this year?
Well, because we're already 30 years too late. And if we keep going any further, we need to see by 2015 huge reductions in our emissions. If we wait much longer on legislation, we're going to miss it altogether. We don't have long to fix this one.
And there's also the international climate talks in Copenhagen.
Right, well, exactly. The U.S. absolutely needs to get on track to Copenhagen, and we can't do that, arguably, without real legislation in this country that is binding and decisive.
And how can people learn more? Where can they learn about this action on March 2nd?
CapitalClimateAction.org is the official website of the action. We're going to have nonviolence trainings all over the country in this month leading up to the event, so people can plug into those in their hometown, and then we'll have many more here in DC. So go there to get more information, see the endorsing organizations, which is almost 70 groups at this point. It's really an impressive display of the American public.
And the website one more time?
www.capitalclimateaction.org.
Great. Well, a big thanks to Kate Rooth of Greenpeace. March 2nd will obviously be a test in Washington, D.C. for whether mass protests still matter in America. But one way or another, the future of coal will likely be decided in 2009. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
I've scarred them all on my own, and I've seen them fighting battles out on their own. I try to mind them, my infirmate kind, they are my children, my threatened kin. I try to mind them, it's all about where they've been. On this peroxide and salt, you know, just watch it out, watch your mouth. You know I'm crawling back towards your shore. No confusion, my hands are birds, they lost their focus. Floating youth upon their pegs with my strength, I've been ruthless. You won't find me in here, no. Fatal to the hidden. That in my hand, she insisted all was hers. On the oceans I've been swimming, the salt water deep within my head. It's fatal to the hidden. That up in my hands, I insisted is all my own. On the mountains I've been digging, it's earthquake thick beneath my nails. This was fast, and I hear my everything and just not stay by the skewer. In my hands, it's on my own. Darkness will fast, and I hear my everything and just not stay by the skewer. In my hands, it is all on my own. Approach me with a poker held high. Belief in this thing is belief in steel. My hands are monsters, I hold them high. Come on, they have their voices, children's voices held up or so high. In the sky, angels chide them, yeah. My hands are innocent, just so they cry. Oh, I saw they cry. Oh, so they cry. Oh, so they cry. That's I hear my everything and just but not still I just in my hands, it's on my own. Thoughtless, but that's I hear my everything. limitations. And I still I just that I put my hands, it is on my own.
Well, welcome to the Coffee House, gang.
Thank you.
Rob, Heather, Rowan. Holy moly. So, what genre would we put that one in?
Oh, traditional folk by far. That's why you're allowing us on the program, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
I couldn't hear the banjo though.
The banjo.
Or the accordion.
Well, the banjo player is sick today, and we had to eat the accordion player because we were poor.
Hungry. Yeah. Okay. Seriously, when you send out promo, do they know what they're going to get? Because it's really it's an amazingly different sound. Right.
Do they know what we're going to get?
They know. In other words.
Yeah. Well, we put it out as acoustic rock, very percussive acoustic rock. And then we try to use a lot of quotes that we've gotten from other newspapers, so they know we're not just making up
your own
random
press kit,
blurbs. And a lot of comparisons that our fans have given us, which some of them make sense, some of them are crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. It's heavy into percussion, almost on the same level as the vocals and the guitar. I mean, everything's. I mean, it's really a blend, and it's very different. It's a good sound. I like it. I mean, I've been listening to you guys for years. Truth in advertising here. The name Iliami, I know it, of course, but explain how you came up with that, and for those listeners or viewers at home, so they understand it.
I'm not going to lie.
No.
Normally I would lie. Heather tells me not to lie to people anymore. I'm trying to be a good person. Iliami stands for I love you and I miss you. It was originally the name of it was a performance art project that came up out of Baltimore City. There were these stickers everywhere, scrawled with I love you and I miss you. And they had these very nostalgic sort of images on them. And so me and a couple friends put together a musical project by the same name that gave us the same sort of nostalgic feeling.
How many years has this been?
In its current formation, actually, the voice from behind Rob.
Yeah, this Heather.
In its current formation, this is going to be our 7th anniversary in November.
Yeah, and Heather's the newest member, so 7th anniversary for her.
And what are you taking us out with?
What are we taking you out?
Matador.
Matador.
Out the door, or Matador.
Matador.
Matador. Very good.
Which is off of
Between Lover and Twilight.
Between Lover and Twilight. Okay.
That's good. Heather, I'm glad you're here. Okay, take us home, guys.
I'm a matador, my mother told me so. She left a message for me all the way from San Francisco. She said, all this cloak tied in your hands, you're destined for achievement. With your kind of swept through life and your path into the pavement. I don't want to say but lost my faith in codes in case of my blood is just as red. This matador is weary of a winding and creeping. Every direction of this is just distraction, not a protection of the weakness inside. This mirrored armor reflects the scars of those who come to see. Not so sure as they who the casualty is supposed to be. Never fight the fight without against a mystery. Never where you always could have been, and now you're nothing in history. Yet this battle waits for later. Maybe never, never's better than safer. I don't want to work this hard forever. Get no minutes, never. The bearer of two choices.
Every day I know peace to fight, to deserve my name. What if I refuse? Would horns still cut me? Once in the hands of you.
I'm a matador, my mother told me so. But how many bulls must I fight before I'm allowed to go? With every win, my reputation only spreads and grows. One day I will miss a step and fall beneath the fall beneath the